Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another top 5 Total War video. This time covering the top 5 most challenging Total War games. So these are the campaigns that, across an average of all the playable factions, provide the player with the most challenging experience going from start to victory conditions, based on the hardest difficulty that's playable. So with that being said, let's jump now to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is Shogun Total War. And the primary reason it's getting a spot on this list is due to the limitations of its engine, not necessarily the quality of its AI. Now, the AI knows how to play the game, it's nothing special though. Does the AI get a lot of cheats? It does get some noticeable bonuses, but there's other Total War games that get even more. Now, the limitations, how does that affect the actual challenge of the campaign? Well, I've often found that when a strategy game gives the player numerous or even excessive tools to work with and mechanics, that those games tend to be the easiest to complete, due to the fact that AI really does have a lot of trouble juggling lots of mechanics. Oftentimes the most challenging strategy games are the ones that basically tie your hands behind your back, give you very tools to work with, and Shogun Total War just happens to be one of those. There's not a lot going on the campaign map on any given turn, not a lot you can do. It basically boils down to this: ancient actions, build something, move your armies. That's more or less it. Now, that's not the main problem. The main thing that makes it challenging is actually on the battle map. Now, you could of course just auto-resolve your battles if this is too much of a problem. If you've got superior numbers and a superior general, auto-resolving is a pretty safe option. But if you truly want to be good at a game of these Total War games, oftentimes manual resolve is the way to go, especially if the odds are against you. Now, the problem is on the battle map is that it's extremely clunky. The UI is terrible, but it's the first Total War game, so it can be forgiven for it. But I think the main problem is managing your units, and for somebody who perhaps just bought the game and plays it for the first time, it can be a real headache, because you cannot really utilize the full potential of your keyboard and mouse setup. There's a lot of keys that just aren't utilized compared to other Total War games. In fact, on your mouse, there's almost no point to even having a right mouse button, because to maneuver your troops around, you left click to select the unit, you left click to move it, and you have to left click and drag if you want to position it in a certain place. Now, that can be a problem when you have units overlapping one another and you're trying to click and drag and you accidentally end up selecting a different unit, and it just takes you longer to make these maneuvers. In addition to that, the troops, when they move, the pathfinding is really, really awkward, and it could just be a real problem. There's other Total War games in where you can maneuver your troops perfectly and just charge right into the enemy's rear without any real pathfinding problems, and it just makes your battle plan go really smoothly. And in Shogun Total War, that can be a bit of an arduous task. Now, the most experienced players will be able to do this, but it comes down to being experienced with understanding the limitations of the engine, not necessarily with being a mastermind strategist. And that's why it's getting number 5 slot. Let's move on now to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is Napoleon Total War. And I'm sure that a lot of people are sitting there right now going, "Oh, Napoleon Total War, it's easy, what's it even doing on this list?" And to those people, I'm sure that they already have 100, if not 1,000 hours in this game. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that dispute every item on this list, and that's okay. But I also want people to think about the fact that how many hours do you have in these games? Any game that you put, or anything in life that you put an inordinate amount of time into, you're going to get very good at it. And that's going to seem like it becomes easy. Oh, mountain climbing. Ugh, it's easy. Anyone can do it. Well, how many hours have you put into it? Oh, half my life. Practice makes perfect. So what I've taken into consideration with these games is how likely a new player is going to get wiped out very early on and get overwhelmed based on the mechanics, based on the highest difficulty. How unforgiving the AI is and how unforgiving the overall mechanics of the game is. Easiest games will allow you to make silly mistakes and still survive, and the most difficult ones will not allow you to let any mistakes occur, or else you will die. And Napoleon Total War is one of those games where if you do make a silly mistake at the beginning, it could be your head on the chopping block. Probably not if you're playing as France. You probably do have a few lives with that faction, but if you're playing as Prussia, as an example, you really don't have a lot of wiggle room, and it does boil mostly down to diplomacy. Obviously, the 19th century wars were very diplomatically focused. Lots of alliances, coalitions, whatnot. And unfortunately, the game does not really represent very good diplomacy, especially when you compare it to Europa Universalis 4. Now, your alliances can completely break down seemingly on nothing, and in very severe ways in this game, if you don't understand some very basic things. It's very temperamental, and you have to be careful. Something that, for most of us who are used to other Total War games where you don't have to be careful, you can easily fall into that trap. The thing is, if you expand too quickly, you'll get an aggressive expansion penalty with all factions, even your allies. And if you get too much of it, they'll hate you for it, even if you're attacking their enemies. So you have to be careful not to expand too quickly, too early, and that's where it can get you in a big trap. Because AI factions in this on the highest difficulty, even if they only own one region, are able to recruit multiple stacks. And you, as a multi-region nation, might struggle to recruit one decent stack, because you're going to want to spend some money on building each turn. You don't get any money from looting settlements or winning battles, so you need to have a decent income. You can't improve your income unless you build things, and that stuff takes a lot of time. So you have to be very careful and maintain a balance in this Total War game, more so than many of the others. In addition to that, going onto the battle map, very unforgiving difficulty rating. Your elite troops can lose to militia troops in a firing match, because they just get shitloads of bonuses. It's a bit of an issue, but that's just how it is. And so you need to learn how to bypass those difficulty ratings, mostly by utilizing effective artillery strategies, like canister shot and putting your artillery, not in front of a hill so it just bounces up into the sky. Making sure that you use square formation with your infantry upon cavalry charges, something that I've definitely made mistakes on as well. And, not charging your own cavalry into enemy pike formation and to spike traps, essentially. So there's a lot of things that you can do to make a mistake, and they can have massive effects on your campaign with Napoleon, which is why it's getting the number 4 slot. Anyway, let's move on now to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Total War Warhammer 2, and the primary reason it's taking this spot on the list is due to the amount of cheats that the AI get, and also the penalties that the player gets on legendary difficulty. Starting with the penalties, you get a -8 public order penalty to all of your provinces, which at the beginning of the campaign basically means you can't maintain public order unless you specifically build public order buildings, which will then use up your build slots, not allowing you to make enough money, not allowing you to recruit, etc., etc. There are problems with doing that. And another thing is that for every additional army that you recruit after your first one will increase all of your upkeep by 15% for every army that you recruit, making them extremely expensive later down the track, even for basic troops. This is something that the AI doesn't have to deal with. Now, in terms of the AI bonuses, they get a hell of a lot of bonuses. In terms of, they get extra money, they get reduced upkeep, they get extra recruit slots, they don't have to worry about as much public order problems. They used to get bonuses to their public order, but CA has patched that out, so this may have actually gotten a higher position on this list if I had made this video a couple of weeks ago, but since I'm making it now, it's, I think, third place is where it belongs. Now, in addition to all that, the AI is decent, not amazing. It's best when it's attacking, and it's terrible when it's defending, especially when it's defending settlements. It's very passive. If it wasn't so passive, it probably would have made the top spot, but it is passive. When attacking someone, they usually do a reasonable job. It's usually just rush tactics, but they do a reasonable job. There is a lot that you can do to cheese the game, but there's a lot you can do to cheese the game in every Total War game. So what it really comes down to is an overall reasonably competent AI with a hella fucking load of bonuses that makes this game such a challenging campaign. Anyway, let's now move on to the number 2 slot. Coming in at number 2 is Total War Shogun 2. Now, unlike the first game, this game is polished. The UI is nice, everything works nicely, maneuvering your troops around it really couldn't be much better than this. Everything just works really well in Shogun 2, so the engine itself is not working against you. So what makes this game particularly challenging? It's basically everything else. The AI is among some of the best AI in the Total War franchise, but they also get hella cheats. As with most of the Total War games, but they really do get hella cheats, especially on Legendary difficulty, which of course is what we're focusing on. You don't get any public order problem differences due to different difficulties, but when you're facing a one settlement faction that's got all samurai and 3 armies, and you've got a bunch of regions and you can barely afford your first samurai army, you gotta scratch your head and be like, yeah, something's not right there. In addition to that, the battle difficulty can be a little bit steep, but if you use your tactics well, snipe the enemy generals, you'll be okay. You can take on armies of equal or greater strength, utilizing choke points like river crossings and settlement sieges can be very good for you. The AI is very passive when it comes down to defending their settlements, and oftentimes overly aggressive when assaulting settlements, which you can use to your advantage. But the big thing that will get you with this game, and it's one of the only Total War games we can lose after the initial struggle, is Realm Divide. If you conquer too much, too soon, everyone will declare war on you, and there is no going back. You can't peace out with them for any more than a turn. Once Realm Divides happen, that's it. You win or you die. So, something that's not well known to players is that to new players it might be a good idea for you to just wait a little while, build your regions up a little bit, finish researching your technologies, because that's all going to come in handy later down the track, and make sure that your armies and generals are as good as possible. Spend some time not capturing territories, but just fighting enemies just for practice, and build yourself up in other ways aside from territorially, because like I said, if you're in the middle of the map here and you get Realm Divide, like I said, it's all over for you. You just have to fight or die, and some of the most unrelenting AI is in Total War Shogun 2, and that's why it's a number 2 slot. It's unrelenting AI. The diplomacy is actually pretty decent until you get to Realm Divide, then diplomacy gets thrown out the window. Another little tip is, in the early stages of the campaign, don't sign too many alliances, because they will drag you into too many wars. And if you do have a war going on, end it quickly, because if you're in a war and then other AI factions look at you and be like, oh, this guy's in a war, I'm just going to have a cheeky little declare war here, and then everyone else is like, well, he's already in 5 wars, I'll declare war on him as well. And when you're at war with like 7, 8, 9 other people, nobody really wants to peace out with you, even if they're losing to you, because they just be like, well, you're losing all your other wars, so I'm going to keep fighting you. So you got to be very careful with Shogun 2. It's very easy to get into a pitfall of too many wars, and it's very hard to get out of it, and that's why it gets the number 2 slot. Let's now move on to the number 1 slot, the most challenging Total War game. Taking the number 1 spot for the most challenging Total War game is Total War Attilla. This game just throws everything at you. Now, if I was to list everything that makes this game challenging, it would take up half of the video. So I'm going to try and be brief and just talk in sort of bullet points. So basically, public order, you're going to have revolts. On Legendary difficulty, you've got the -8 public order penalty. In addition to a lot of other issues that will occur, you're going to have revolts. You're going to have revolts all over the place, regardless of what faction you choose. Small faction, large faction, you're going to have revolts. Just deal with it. You're just going to have to fight them. Maintaining public order in the early campaign is virtually impossible. You can do it, but it could end up just costing you too much. Next thing, food. You need food. Running out of food on a faction-wide basis, your armies will desert and starve. Managing to keep it afloat might seem okay, but it's not just that. You also have to keep it so that every single one of your provinces actually manages to feed itself, because if they have to import the food from other regions, you will have public order problems feeding into the first issue. Another thing is that climate change happens. It's the only Total War game that has climate change, and it happens pretty damn quickly and very severely. By the end of the campaign, most territories are pretty much unable to produce food via fertility, relying you to use buildings that are less effective for food, and meaning that you have to spend more of your limited build slots on food, which then also means spending more of your limited build slots on negating the problems for food, and less of those build slots on, say, good military buildings and monetary buildings. The more you expand, the more corruption you receive, so getting a big empire is actually kind of bad with Total War Attilla, which is the huge difficulty problem with the Western Roman Empire. You might think it's huge and powerful, but it's not because of corruption, even though it's been largely nerfed since it first came out. I had to deal with it with, what, capped at 95% corruption? At least it's not that bad now. And then the biggest problem of them all, depending on which faction you choose, is of course Attila himself. Once he activates, comes of age, and goes on the warpath, he's got up to 12 stacks that respawn immediately once you kill them. If you wipe out the Huns prior to Attila coming of age, they come back immediately straight away. It's something that I have done before. I've wiped out the Huns completely in a single turn, and they came back the next turn fully replenished. So you're working against the game by not wiping out these stacks. You have to really just sort of keep them away without actually wiping them out, because they come back at full strength. It's better to let them recruit some mercenaries or go up and raid some desolate territories for a while. Again, it depends on what faction that you choose as to whether or not you even have to deal with the Huns. Those that you choose in Africa or in the East, generally speaking, don't have to worry about the Huns. You can simply just wait for Attila to die of old age. But if you're playing as any European faction, Attila usually comes headfirst for you, and it can be pretty daunting because he'll have technology that you don't have, despite the fact that you might be Rome. They've just got far more advanced equipment than you do, way more high tier units. It's a challenge. There's no two ways about it. Playing on Legendary difficulty in Total War Attila is a challenge, especially if you want to play as the Western Roman Empire. And, I mean, we can go on with even more things. I mean, there's civil wars, politics, poor diplomacy mechanics, poor taxation mechanics, poor technology mechanics. Everything is there to set you up to fail. This game wants you to die. It's the only Total War game, really, where it's not an empire building, it's a survival game. You just have to try not to fucking die playing Total War Attila. Again, of course, if you know how to play the game, you've put 1,000 hours into it, it's not that tough. But for a new player, this game will knock you on your ass if you don't know what you're doing, more so than any other Total War game ever made. Which, for some people, is enjoyable. It's not a horrible Total War game, it's not a great Total War game, but we're not here talking about that. It's definitely a challenging Total War game. Anyway, that's my top 5 list. Let me know what you think, and if you disagree with any of my choices, let me know why, and which games you think are actually more challenging than the ones that I put on this list. And if you do agree with me, great. Anyway, check out some of my other top 5 videos, and I'll see you next time, fuckers.